let me welcome you all to this afternoon reading, and good day to everyone coming in from everywhere. And thank you for joining us, and welcome to this celebration of the 130th birthday of Pulitzer Prize winning poet Edna St. Vincent Millay. And this program is called Millay in Maine, presented by the Farnsworth Art Museum in collaboration with Millay House Rockland. And this event is hosted by Kathleen Ellis. Thank you, Kathleen, for organizing this, and features writers from across Maine who will be introduced individually by Kathleen. And we'll also be hearing just a bit from Vincent herself from an audio recording in the archives of the Camden Public Library, and used with their permission. I'm Jude Valentine, coordinator of studio and public programs at the Farnsworth Art Museum in Rockland, Maine. And co-piloting this Zoom with me is Gwendolyn Loomis-Smith, the Phyllis Wyeth Director of Learning and Engagement at the Farnsworth. Before we start, I want to mention that because this is a Zoom meeting and not a webinar, and because we have a number of, because the poets can see you, that was part of the deal, that the poets were able to see you and read to you, so we could make it as much of an in-person experience, as close to an in-person experience as possible. It's going to be necessary that you mute yourselves so that we don't pick up any background noise while the program is on. So if you just take a moment to do that, and that would be really helpful. And also, if you wanted to highlight each poet as they speak, you can go to the upper right-hand corner of your Zoom screen where it says gallery, or excuse me, it says view, and you can toggle on that and it will drop down, and you can choose speaker from that list of either gallery or speaker, and then you will be able to see who's ever speaking will be large in your screen. So I think that's all the housekeeping for now. What I'd like to do is introduce Ann Morris, the curator of the Rockland Historical Society and the president of the Millay House Rockland, Millay's childhood home, who will share the great progress of the ongoing renovation of the birth home of Edna St. Vincent Millay. So Anne, you have a program to share.
Okay, share screen. Now what? Oh, open PowerPoint.
Yes.
Okay, all right, here we go. And there's supposed to be a slideshow.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, from the beginning.
Perfect.
Okay. Well, happy birthday to this adorable, inspiring little girl, born February 22nd, 1892, in this double house on Broadway in Rockland. Millay House Rockland is in the final phase of restoring this landmark. We hope to be finished by next winter. On the north side, we have restored the living room and the dining room. Both rooms have Queen Anne woodwork. We have rented this side to provide income, to pay for insurance, taxes, water and sewer, snow removal, and grass cutting for both sides. We have restored the kitchen. We have turned a pantry into a powder room. And upstairs, we have restored 3 bedrooms. This is the one where Edna was born. And we have restored the bathroom. We wanted to replace the siding on the garage, so we did. Volunteers took off the siding, and then our contractor put the shingles on. Under the siding, we found this wonderful door to nowhere, and we saved it. It's hanging like a painting. Now we must start on the south side. The living room and dining room are one big room on this side. So this is the side where we will have programs and a writer in residence. The Ellis Beauregard Foundation is going to partner with us. They will provide a stipend for the writer while we provide the space. This is the south side kitchen. And this is the south side bathroom. We will begin work on the south side in March. We have raised most of the funds we need, but we still need $13,000 and we've applied for some grants. We're hoping that if we start in March, we'll have enough money by the time we are ready to finish. Maine is fortunate to have so many talented poets in the area, and perhaps you would like to help us plan for the future, because we will begin planning programs later this summer. If so, please let me know. In the meantime, if you want to help us reach our restoration goal, go to GoFundMe, Millay House Rockland, or mail a check to Millay House Rockland, Post Office Box 831, Rockland, Maine. And that's it.
Thank you, Anne.
I
If you just go down to the bottom now and stop your screen share.
Okay, there's no indication of the screen share. No, wait a minute. Stop.
There you go.
Stop share.
Yay.
Okay, all right.
That was awesome. Thank you so much. There's so much work that you've done over the last year. It's just remarkable. So thank you so much for all of that historical background and the work on restoring that home. It's just wonderful. So now we have a bit of an audio recording, just a tiny bit. 111 years ago, 1911, Edna St. Vincent Millay began writing Renaissance, and she was only 19 and caring for her ailing father in Kingman, Maine. Renaissance, which moves between life and death and ends with a sense of hope and revival, was the first poem to catapult Millay to stardom, winning the 4th place in the Lyric Year anthology in 1912. This year's birthday celebration we're honoring her by having this audio recording from the Camden Public Library. So I'm going to play it and start. It starts, it's just about a minute, and then Kathleen will be coming on to finish the stanza because the audio clips a bit. So I'll start it now.
All I could see from where I stood was 3 long mountains and a wood. I turned and looked another way and saw 3 islands in a bay. So with my eyes, I traced the line of the horizon, thin and fine, straight around till I was come back to where I'd started from. And all I saw from where I stood was 3 long mountains and a wood. Over these things I could not see. These were the things that bounded me. And I could touch them with my hand, almost, I thought, from where I stand. And all at once things seemed so small, my breath came short and scarce at all. But sure, the sky is big, I said, miles and miles above my head. So here upon my back I lie and looked my hill into the sky. And so I looked, and after all, the sky was not so very tall. The sky, I said, must somewhere stop at.
And sure enough, I see the top. The sky I thought is not so grand. I most could touch it with my hand, and reaching up my hand to try, I screamed to feel it touch the sky. I screamed, and lo, infinity came down and settled over me, forced back my scream into my chest, bent back my arm upon my breast, and pressing of the undefined, the definition on my mind, held up before my eyes a glass through which my shrinking sight did pass, until it seemed I must behold immensity made manifold, whispered to me a word whose sound deafened the air for worlds around, and brought unmuffled to my ears the gossiping of friendly spheres, the creaking of the tented sky, the ticking of eternity.
Thank you, Kathleen. And thank you, Vincent. I just want to introduce Kathleen now. Kathleen Ellis has published 5 collections of poetry, most recently Outer Body Travel. In the 1980s, she co-edited The Eloquent Edge, 15 Maine women writers, and wrote the script for the film documentary Renaissance, Edna St. Vincent Millay at 100, which debuted at the Farnsworth Art Museum. Poems from Kathleen's manuscript Dear Darwin were set to music and released as Parma Recording CD, which was nominated for a 2015 Grammy Award. Recent poems are in the Cafe Review and in the anthologies Enough, Poems of Resistance and Protest, and in A Dangerous New World, Maine Voices on the Climate Crisis, both from Literal Press in Portland. Ellis teaches creative writing and poetry in the Honors College at the University of Maine, Orono, and she's been teaching summer poetry writing workshops at the Farnsworth for more than 25 years. So I honor you. Thank you, Kathleen, and I'm looking forward to this program.
Thank you, Jude. Excuse me. Great way to start, huh? And thanks to the Farnsworth for hosting our 130th birthday reading for Edna St. Vincent Millay. So hearing Vincent's voice and then joining her and reading the first 4 stanzas of Renaissance gave me the shivers, actually. After all, Renaissance is clearly a cry of the heart. In January 1912, in the icy grip of winter in Camden, Maine, Millay wrote in her diary that she was terrified. I am frightened. I do not know of what I am afraid. The thought of the universe makes me sick. It is dread that I feel, an intangible, fatalistic feeling. There is so little on which to build a faith, she said. During this time, she was busy writing the lines that would become Renaissance. When the guests at Camden's Whitehall Inn heard her read the poem aloud 6 months later in August, it convinced one of them to help jumpstart her career, as Jude mentioned, as a poet by convincing Millay's mother to allow Vincent to come down to New York and then attend Vassar College, where she was active as both a poet and a playwright. So what is it that ignited this poem? It might have been the view from the crest of Mount Batty, or it might have been the panorama from the waterfront, anywhere along the western side of Camden Harbor, just down the hill from Vincent's room and across Bayview Street. Anywhere south of the mast and the spar makers, you could see mountains in one direction and islands in the other, which is the way the poem starts. So she begins her 214-line masterpiece. These were the things that bounded me, and I could touch them with my hand. Almost, I thought, from where I stand. And all at once, things seemed so small. My breath came short and scarce at all. In case you couldn't make out the words. It was wonderful to hear her voice, though. I don't know exactly how old she was when she she recorded an LP that was for sale. And actually the Camden Public Library recorded from that recording. So writing the first half of Renaissance lifted her spirits, and the diary entry on her 20th birthday, February 22nd, 1912, is very cheerful. Good morning. I am just 20 years old this minute. Just think, not in my teens anymore and never again. I usually make resolutions on my birthday, but I think I'll not make one today, or perhaps just one. Suppose that during the next year, I try to be fairly decent. Now I am going out and be fairly decent to somebody. Goodbye. According to Daniel Epstein in his 2001 biography of Millay, there can be no more precise account of the psychic burden of the poet, the moral poet, or the anointed saint than in Renaissance. She sent her poem in to the lyric anthology contest under the title Renaissance. And the anthology wanted her to change it to the normal spelling of Renaissance. But she decided, no, it's my poem. I can do what I want with it. So Epstein adds that poet and critic John Crow Ransom, who was restrained but unequivocal in his praise of what he called Millay's genius, said, Renaissance is genuine in the sense that it is the right kind of religious poem for an actual young girl of New England. I don't know whether that's good or bad, but it sounds big. What happened to St. Vincent Millay in the summer and autumn of 1912 has been told and retold by 100 biographers, journalists, and literary historians. After all, she was the most popular woman poet in America and around parts of the world as well during the early 20th century. And Epstein adds that, it's become a legend central to our literary heritage, like the death of Poe or Whitman's reviewing Leaves of Grass under pseudonyms. We should all do that. On August 29th, 1912, when Millay showed up at the Whitehall Inn, dressed up as the pantomime character Pierrette, she sat down at the piano, sang songs, really belted songs out with her sister Norma. And then she just, offhandedly told the audience about Renaissance and its impending publication. And then, of course, they begged to hear her read it. And we all know the rest of the story. From the piano bench at the Whitehall Inn on Route 1 in Camden, Maine, Vincent delivered by heart the whole 214-line poem, after which her world turned upside down. As you hear from our poets today, first reading a Millay poem of their choice, and then one of their own poems, keep in mind this year's theme, Millay in Maine and Maine in Millay. So our first poet lost her. Oh. Hold on. Technical delay for a second. We don't seem to have it. So I have to beg your pardon, those who I don't have bios for due to my fault and not your own. So our first poet is Julia Bowsma, and she has 2 collections of poetry, as well as being the director of the library she's going to tell us where. And she also is working right now, teaching creative writing at the University of Maine at Farmington. And she might also tell us a little bit about where she lives, which is very interesting. Julia. Did I say that she happens to be the current poet laureate of the state of Maine? You need to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Hi, I'm having some technical difficulties.
Oh dear.
And I don't think my internet connection is very strong, and can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
It's just the video that's frozen.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, we can do it that way. I just wanted to make sure it's having some trouble even unmuting myself. My computer is not cooperating today. It's snowing lightly here. I don't know if that's the problem, but it's very beautiful. So I live in sort of on the border of Somerset and Franklin counties, in New Portland, Maine. on a hill that is called Millay Hill. And it's called Millay Hill. Well, I didn't know for a while why it was called Millay Hill for sure, but there's a small cemetery on the 86 acres that I live on in the middle of the woods on Millay Hill. And in that cemetery is Sarah Denslow Millay, who is, as it turns out, Edna St. Vincent Millay's paternal great-grandmother. And she and her husband, John, started a farm on the property that I now live on. So, which is now just cellar holes and foundations and such, and the cemetery. So my relationship to Millay, as a having become, I'm sorry, I have, of course, a childhood relationship to her, but I wasn't a Mainer then. So my relationship to her now as a Mainer is informed largely through this piece of land, through stories that I've heard about whether, you know, that she used to visit here to see family and things like that. So I tend to look for traces of her on this property. And then I also tend to look for traces of the property and imagine it where I can in her poems. So the poem of hers that I wanted to read today is called Pastoral. If it were only still, with far away the shrill crying of a cock, or the shaken bell from a cow's throat moving through the bushes, or the soft shock of wizened apples falling from an old tree in a forgotten orchard upon the hilly rock. Oh, gray hill, where the grazing herd licks the purple blossom, crops the spiky weed. Oh, stony pasture, where the tall mullein stands up so sturdy on its little seed. So I imagine the hill as the hill I live on. I like to imagine it that way in that poem. And then I've been working on a series of epistolary poems addressed to Edna St. Vincent Millay, and I thought I would share with you the first one of that series. Dear Edna, maybe I'm starting this on the wrong foot, calling you Edna and not Vincent. But history is like that, always swiveling us around ourselves. You share a first name with my great-grandmother, who was born perhaps a few years later than you, who by the time I knew her had shipwrecks for eyes, cloudy as mother of pearl. Macular degeneration, perhaps, opaque islands of distance between what I can see and know and what I can sense only through instinct and absence. Her real name wasn't Edna either. New country, new name, both first and last. Did she choose the name herself or was it assigned? They say I've borne her face since infancy, beakish smile and cryptic downward gaze. Maybe it's the longing I carry in my teeth, in my jutting jawbone. And is that what led me to this land where only a shard of you remains, a waft of story? Where your great-grandmother is buried, her headstone split by a fallen ash, leans off kilter against the rusted fence. I'm told you used to visit here. Always, you've been a trail of crumbs, a quick flash of tail in the woods. And me like a dog with my nose to the earth, though I don't know what I'm looking for. I bet I would have slavered after you if I'd known you curled at your feet. And probably you would have turned me away. Imagine us like an old growth forest, my desire shoulder to shoulder with your desire, my coldness shoulder to shoulder with your coldness, my heat shoulder to shoulder with your heat, the green canopy and shrilling frogs of it, the fresh snow of it, the wizened leaves of us, moss rotting to loam, saplings springing up year after year to greet the gravestones, to guard them from whoever visits there. You're searching, Jay. Thank you.
Kathleen, you're muted.
You got muted.
Okay, you probably heard nothing. Thank you, Julia. It was a wonderful reading. We're sorry we can't see you move around a little bit, but we could hear you, and that's all that counts. So next is François Amar, who I think I can put together his bio without it being in front of me. François is a professor of chemistry at the University of Maine and the former chair of the Honors College. He has been involved in quite a few readings in Maine and at the Belfast Poetry Festival and other places. And he has some very interesting hobbies, including making beer or making wine and making beer, and also doing a wonderful job at teaching me how to use the Umi wood-fired pizza oven, of which he is a master. Okay. Hi, François.
Hi, Kathleen. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to join this wonderful gathering. I've loved hearing all the poetry so far. And thanks also to the Farnsworth and the Millay House for sponsoring this. What a great idea. What a great event. So I was going to read a poem, but I have this slightly longer excerpt from that I want to read to you, because I think it addresses sort of the theme of today's event. This is a couple of paragraphs from her preface to her co-translation of Baudelaire's Fleur du Mal. And she talks about the problem of the translator, and you'll hear a little bit about what she's saying in this couple of paragraphs. There are, on the other hand, words in French which the English language cannot approximate. How, for instance, am I to translate the Frenchman's expression, mon pays? I cannot translate it as my country. When I say my country, I mean my country tis of thee. I mean the United States of America. But the Frenchman, when he says mon pays, is not thinking of France. France is la patrie. He is thinking of a part of Normandy, a part of Provence, bounded by no lines visible on any map, bounded only by the horizon of his early associations, made significant for him by the simple and marvelous events of his childhood and adolescence. It is the part of the world he comes from. To La France, he gives his loyalty, his patriotism, if necessary, his life. But what he really loves is son pays. How can I render this into English? I cannot say my state, my county. I was born in the state of Maine, but the state of Maine is very big. I have not picked mayflowers on every hillside of its many rocky hillsides. I have not steamed clams in seaweed on every spruce-wooded island off its coast. No, it is not quite that. But sometimes when motoring up along the shore of Maine, after we have passed Wiscasset, when you are coming to Waldoboro and Thomaston, when I know that only a few miles further on are Rockland, Rockport, Union, Camden, I say to my companion in French, because there's no way of saying it in English, c'est mon pays. So I thought I'd read a poem that actually came out of a workshop with Kathleen, sponsored by the Farnsworth, and is maybe of the poems I've done, maybe this is the one that's closest to that pays in some ways. It's called At the Window, after viewing Looking Out 1 and 2 by William Irvine. I walked to the village and back along the Cove Road, an old man led by an old dog. Glimpsed you at the window where your gran stood often, looking out on the moonlit bay, and I sometimes with her. If I was a consolation to her, it was enough for me, but never enough for your mother, who had to leave this place as soon as she was able. Grief is a form of love, but true journey is return, even as it skips a generation. Will you shore up the old house? Will you make it live again? Thank you.
Is everyone frozen? I don't know. Can you hear me, everybody? Oh, okay.
Yes.
Our next poet is Carol Willette Bachofner, an award-winning poet, photographer, and watercolorist. She served as Poet Laureate of Rockland from 2012 to 2016. Carol is the author of 7 books of poetry, most recently Test Pattern, a fan toad of prose poems, Finishing Line Press. She's at work on a mixed genre memoir called A Life Beset with Words. Her poetry has appeared in numerous journals such as Prairie Schooner, the Connecticut Review, the Comstock Review, Cream City Review, as well as in the anthology Dawnland Voices, an anthology of writings from Indigenous New England. Carol.
Hi, everyone, all of you, my fellow poets, and thank you to the Farnsworth, and thank you also to the Kathleen and to Vincent herself, who has been an inspiration for me since I was a young girl. I chose today to read Ragged Island, and the reason for that is because Vincent had, as I have, a real love of the Maine coast. So this poem just seemed appropriate to me. Ragged Island. There where those black spruces crowd to the edge of the precipitous cliff, above your boat, under the eastern wall of the island, and no wave breaks, as if all had been done and long ago that needed doing. And the cold tide, unimpeded by shoal or shelving ledge, moves up and down instead of in and out. And there is no driftwood there because there is no beach. Clean cliff going down as deep as clear water can reach. No driftwood, such as abounds on the roaring shingle, to be hefted home for fires in the kitchen stove. Barrels banged ashore about the boiling outer harbor. Lobster buoys on the eelgrass of the sheltered cove. There, thought unbraids itself and the mind becomes single. There, you row with tranquil oars, and the ocean shows no scar from the cutting of your placid keel. Care becomes senseless there, pride and promotion remote. You only look, you scarcely feel. Even adventure with its vital uses is aimless ardor now, and thrift is waste. Oh, to be there under the silent spruces, where the wide, quiet evening darkens without haste, over a sea with death acquainted, yet forever chaste. My favorite line from that poem is the phrase is the mind becomes single. I think about that a lot. The poem that I'm going to read of mine, there's one word that you need to know. It's a funny word and a fun word, and it's spruik, S-P-R-U-I-K. And it means as a verb to give an elaborate speech. As a noun, it is an elaborate speech. Let's just say God and angels are immaterial because they cannot be seen. Some solid singularity is what we seek for proof. Say the spruik is not wasted on the assembly because of shiny statements that rouse the invisible ones. Go on in faith. Try to empty your minds of commercials, jingles. When the speaker rises at the podium, wait for the lesson of the day. Insist that science is the ultimate search for truth. Don't ignore the signs on the horizon morning and evening. Nature booms out its mystery as we are busy at our desks. If we stop when we feel satisfaction rising in our veins, we miss the thing we need. Be staggered by truth that materializes at the tree line in the volcano or the shimmered spume of the sea. Say gods and angels exist in these. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Our next poet is Ellen Goldsmith. And she is a widely published poet, and probably some of you know her as a teacher of poetry on the Mid-Coast. She has a brand new publication, a beautiful collection called Left Foot, Right Foot. Her other collections include Where to Look, Such Distances, and No Pine Tree in This Forest is Perfect, which won the Hudson Valley Writers Center chapbook contest. She's a resident of Cushing and a Farnsworth Art Museum docent, as well as being professor emeritus at the University of New York.
Thank you, Kathleen. The poem I chose of Edna St. Vincent Millay's is entitled Ebb. In one short sentence, this poem gives so much. Ebb. I know what my heart is like since your love died. It is like a hollow ledge holding a little pool left there by the tide. A little tepid pool drying inward from the edge. So the poem that I'm going to read is a recent poem, and also, like Ebb, an aftermath poem. What I'm learning from the light. I wake to light after the dark wind of yesterday, and it's as if my inner body turns from gray to gold, and the phrase lighten up is illuminated as never before. I think back to my recovery, see it in the pattern on the wooden floor, areas of light and dark, a mix of shine and shadow.
Our next poet is Annaliese Jakimides. Where are you?
I'm here.
Ah, there she is. Okay. And Annaliese's poetry and prose has been published in many periodicals, newspapers, and anthologies. She's also recorded essays for NPR and Maine Public. Her work has been cited in national competitions, including the Stephen Dunn Poetry Prize, the Maine Literary Awards, and the Pushcart Prize. Her essay, I Tell Henry, included in the fourth, what's the rest of the title? I Tell Henry.
The plate is red.
Oh, I Tell Henry the Plate is Red, which is included in the forthcoming anthology, Breaking Bread from Beacon Press. After 27 years on a dirt road in Maine, where she pumped water by hand, she now lives in downtown Bangor.
Thank you very much. I'm reading a letter of Edna St. Vincent Millay's, and the letter I'm reading, she wrote in 1912 to her friend Gladys Niles, who lived in Bangor. She graduated from Bangor High School, lived most of her life in Bangor, but she also was at UMaine College of Law at this particular time. She was part of the class of 1914, which really moves me, since I can't imagine there were only about 1,000 people in the college at the time, and I can't imagine there were that many women studying law. I just want to point out that the closing in this letter that I'm going to read is in quote, she puts in quotation marks. And I'll note here that as I say it is exactly how she spelled it. It's sort of a hip hop slang, it strikes me, which is really kind of moving. Camden, Maine, August 9th, 1912. Dear Gladys, You will remember that I promised to write, but didn't say when. This is when, and I'm sure you'll think that what I write now is worth having waited for. You know the contest that Mother wrote about while I was up there? Crazy to have me try for it, because Mr. Wheeler of Current Literature was one of the judges. Well, Gladys, dear, my poem is accepted, and I'm going to be in the book, one of 100 American authors with a biographical sketch in the lyric year. You're glad, aren't you? And Gladys, I've got 2 personal letters from the editor himself that are just like drama to read. Of course, he thought I was a man, and the first letter in his own handwriting was like this. E. Vincent Millay, Esquire. Sir, I feel bound to refrain from stating how tremendously I like your Renaissance. Kindly furnish material for a biographical sketch of yourself for the lyric year, etc., etc. Yours faithfully, the editor. Well, I was mildly insane, not violent, just out of my head. And I wrote telling him what he wanted to know about my writing and that I was a girl and 20. I told him of the several prizes I have won and how when I was 14, Edward J. Wheeler reviewed a poem of mine in Current Literature, saying, the poem which follows seems to us to be phenomenal. And do you know, I think it may be Mr. Wheeler himself who is writing me. He signs himself just the editor, but in his last letter, he says, you are not corresponding with Mr. Kennerly, publisher, but with ? Editor of the lyric year. He is actually teasing me, the idea of trying to make me guess who he is. But I must tell you what he said about my poem. You will remember it, I think. It was the one, a part of which I said aloud to you and Sophie that day, the Down Underground one, you know. I worked it over and finished it. It is 7.5 typed pages long. I will send you a copy. The second letter, somewhat cut, is as follows. Dear and true poetess, you have indeed astonished me through and through, a lassie of 20. Is it possible? I am not alone in thinking that your poem is very fine, original, strong, impressive. Ah, Gladys, read those words again. Sometimes I think that Renaissance is the most interesting poem in the selected 100 of the lyric year. And now that I have a slight acquaintance with its surprising authoress, that's me, my estimate is no whit the less stable, etc. Yours faithfully, the editor. He said there have been over 9,100 manuscripts, and mine is the most interesting, if of the 100, then of all. Tell Mrs. Dunton that I delivered all her messages. Everyone was very glad to hear from her and want to see her very much. Give her my love, real love, as she once said to me for Papa. Have you been out driving often behind Peggy and Polly, those beautiful horses that I didn't see? Did Mrs. Dunton fry donuts Monday while Mrs. Briggs washed? And is Curly still petted and abused? What a lot of foolish questions people ask in letters, but at least I haven't talked about the weather. Please write soon, even if I didn't. I'll promise to answer it right off. Tell Sophie that I was haunted for weeks by strains from the song she sang, and have paid her the compliment of not trying to sing it myself. However, I've composed a new ragtime song that beats the little rag doll all holler. What plays have you seen lately? And are you going to the festival this fall? Give my love to all the peoples and to the pink geranium in my room. It is absolutely imperative that I eat my dinner now. Love, Vincent, just Camden me. And that's exactly how she writes it, Camden me. Because the letter was very long, I'm reading a 30-second poem. And it was written in my early times. So it's called Escape. Winter branches scratch and skirl, swallow the trembling of this house, too long misunderstood. It never wanted much, only a resurrection. I thought that's what we had given it in those years of crowbar-worn blisters, the prying and lying and laying the flaying, but each dawn brought one more birthmark smudging the sky until all I could do was run wild into the dusk and smoke. Thank you very much.
Next is Gary Lawless.
I'm here.
Okay, I figured you were. Gary Lawless is co-owner of Gulf of Maine Books in Brunswick and publisher of Blackberry Books. His new book, How the Stones Came to Venice, published by Literal Books of Portland, Maine, will soon be published in Italy in Italian and in Brazil in Portuguese. Welcome.
Thank you. Since I spend most of my time in Brunswick, I feel closer to Ragged Island. And in June of 1933, Millay was visiting a friend of hers, Esther Adams, at Adams' home on Bailey Island. And then one morning, Millay and her husband went for a walk in the early morning. And as the fog cleared, they saw this island emerge into the light. And Millay said to her husband, quote, "Is it a mirage? It is the most beautiful island I've ever seen. I want it." In her journal that day, she wrote 4 words: Ragged Island, Garnet Rocks. 2 weeks later, they bought the island for $750, and it was a place to which she returned in the summers when she could. I'm going to read a poem, Low Tide, which was actually written before she ever saw Ragged Island. Low tide. These wet rocks where the tide has been barnacled white and weeded brown and slimed beneath to a beautiful green, these wet rocks where the tide went down will show again when the tide is high, faint and perilous, far from shore, no place to dream but a place to die, the bottom of the sea once more. There was a child that wandered through a giant's empty house all day, house full of wonderful things and new, but no fit place for a child to play. And a little poem for the place that I return to. I live here. I'm sitting in the parlor of the farmhouse owned by Henry Beston and Elizabeth Coatsworth, and then their daughter, Kate Beston Barnes. And now Beth and I live here on Damascotta Lake. Do the loons tell their children stories of this lake? Do the stones remember the glacier? In the clay, clamshells from 10,000 years. Do they dream of the ocean? Do we remember the time before there were stars, before there was light? Thank you.
Next is Kristen Lindquist. Okay, we can watch the Northern Lights here.
I'm here. Are you waiting for me?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I'm
Come
here.
on. I don't know. We couldn't see you. Here you are. Kristen Lindquist lives in Camden, where as a high school senior, she received a collection of Millay's poetry from the Knox County Republicans. Her first collection of poetry, Transportation, was a finalist for a Maine Literary Award. Her haiku chapbook, It Always Comes Back, was the winner of the 2020 Snapshot Press E Chapbook Award. Welcome.
Thank you. So just following up on what Gary just read, basically, I too, even though I live just a couple blocks away from one of the several places the Millay family lived here in Camden, right here in Millville. She lived right down the road here, what's now a car wash, right on the river like we do. But I actually was more interested in focusing on Ragged Island as well, because I too have a relationship with Maine's Highlands. So what I thought would be interesting, since I knew Carol was going to read the poem Ragged Island, would be to read an excerpt from Nancy Mitford's 2001 biography of Millay called Savage Beauty. There's just a really interesting little section here. I wanted to, just go back to that and sort of trace her history with the island, and just found this excerpt so interesting. I thought that would be what I would share with you. So this is just a little bit from the biography. It takes place about 5 years before her death in 1950. She is in the throes of addiction to both alcohol and morphine. So she's in pretty rough shape and apparently suffering from writer's block. So not feeling productive and not in good physical health or mental health. In the summer of 1945, with the war in Europe at last over, Edna and Eugene left for Ragged Island, where they had decided to try their own cure. On the way, they planned to spend the night with Tess Adams at her house on Bailey's Island, which faced Ragged. Tess had invited Vincent Sheehan and his wife Dinah for the weekend. For the weekend they would arrive. Vincent Sheehan wrote about their meeting in his book, The Indigo Bunting, a memoir. This is a quote from his memoir. Toward the end of the afternoon, the Bouwsma arrived from Steepletop in a car loaded down with all sorts of food, pots and pans, and other necessities for their stay on Ragged Island, he wrote. They had tea in the great room facing the ocean, where there was always a fire in the immense stone fireplace. Our conversation was lively, but Edna took very little part in it. She said enough to show that she was with us, although nothing more. She was rather silent and looked very frightened, small, and withdrawn. Sheehan wrote, going through a bad time, the worst a writer could go through. She could not write. And that wasn't her only issue at the time. Sheehan was still too much frightened of her to address any remark in her direction. Miss Millay was, to put it bluntly, a frightening apparition to many of us. Her temperament was so variable that it was impossible to tell what mood might overwhelm her next. But most of all, I think, the reason even the most sympathetic stranger was frightened of Edna was that she was herself so terrified. Her terror communicated itself and created terror. I hardly dared to look at her more than once or twice that evening. Eugene, of course, knew all about this. That is probably why he was so jovial, talkative, and merry at tea and afterward to save Edna from the pain of speech. And then I'm skipping ahead a little bit. 2 months later, in September, the Sheehans visited Ragged Island. Eugene picked them up in their motor dory, the Greasy Joan, and set out into the open Atlantic, 4 miles from the coast of Maine. 45 minutes later, they coasted into anchor at Ragged, where Edna appeared in a white shirt, her dungarees rolled to the knee, as she ran down the rocky path to meet them. Sheehan would never forget this sight of her. There were circling round and round her head all the way down through the rocks 3 seagulls. She came toward us, as you might say, in a completely legendary manner. She was glowing with health and spirits. Her red hair was blown free, and her green eyes were shining. She was in every respect different from the mouse-like stranger of 2 months before. Their house, set on a hill overlooking the rocky little harbor, was simple and bare. A table and chairs, a couple of beds and books. There was no electricity. They fell asleep when it was dark and rose at first light. Behind the house were woods. Out front, a great iron pot for boiling lobsters. When she thought it was time, it was Edna who tossed the lobsters into the pot. It was the only time I ever saw her do any cooking, if that is cooking. That was a quote. She told him she was in trouble. I haven't been able to write anything at all for a long time. It sometimes seems to me that it is all over, that it will never come again. When Sheehan tried to suggest that casting her writing into prose might be a release for her, she said it was difficult. It isn't for me, she said slowly, as if thinking aloud. I'm afraid of it. And then this last bit is an excerpt from Sheehan's memoir again. Edna spent long periods at a time in the water. She was part mermaid, apparently, and quite insensible to cold or to fatigue in water. She always swam naked. Eugene was less thoroughly a sea child, and during her incredible durations in the water, he would be setting lobster pots or bringing in the lobsters, cleaning up the house, or repairing nets for fishing. Nobody ever wears a bathing suit at Ragged Island, she said decisively when we arrived at the harbor. It's a rule of the island. We think bathing dress of any sort is indecent, and so do the waves, and so do the seagulls. And so does the wind. No bathing dress has been seen on Ragged Island since we came here. So I thought that you would find that interesting insight into her state of mind and how being on the island for a couple of months really, transformed her. Maybe it didn't cure her of her writer's block, but she definitely sounded like a healthier person overall from her time on the island. And then I thought I would follow that up with one of my poems called On the Island. It's not about Ragged Island, it's about Great Spruce Head Island in eastern Penobscot Bay, where I had the good fortune to stay in the Porter family house, Elliott and Fairfield Porter's family house there for a week as part of a writers and artists retreat. So I had a similar experience, although fortunately I was not recovering from an addiction. On the island, it's not an escape, but a return. You begin by stripping off your clothes to jump into the ocean, so seaweed can tickle your legs. Next, you stay up too late reading until you become afraid of the dark again, imagining ghosts and dragons moving in the halls. Then you collect periwinkles of soft brown and mauve, find ones with holes so you can string a necklace. You remember how to suck nectar from tiny red clover blossoms. Chase the snake that crosses your path. Spend an hour looking for the perfect black beach stone. Skip stones as if you're still competing for the most skips. At supper, you laugh as loudly as you want and go back for seconds of dessert. Nothing can touch you here, not even calories. Let your shoulders burn and wash your hair with fog. Think only of yourself and bird song and tides, their ebb and flow. Thank you.
Kristen? Am I muted still?
Can hear you, Kathleen.
Oh, okay. Oh, I was wondering, I don't know where she went. Kristen, was the photo behind you of Ragged Island or of an island?
The photo, actually, yes, the image behind me is from Monhegan Island, where I spent over a month every year. So yes,
Yeah.
another Maine island.
Wow, Carl just came out of nowhere here. Okay.
Yeah, I'm here.
Hi.
Hey,
Born in New York City, Carl Little holds degrees from Dartmouth, Middlebury, and Columbia. His poetry has recently appeared in the Maine Arts Journal and the Cafe Review, and coming out in Lowell Review, and an essay on favorite meals in the Beacon Press anthology, Breaking Bread, edited by Deborah Spark and Deborah Joy Corey. In 2021, the Dorothea and Leo Rabkin Foundation awarded Little a Lifetime Achievement Award for his art writing. Many of us here today have had our poems included in some of your art books, and we are very grateful for how your writing straddles the work of both artists and poets. So thank you. Congratulations on that.
my pleasure, Kathleen. Thanks. And I just want to say, here's to skinny dipping. Also, thank you for organizing this reading, and thanks to Jude Valentine and the Farnsworth for hosting. And it's just wonderful to see the progress on the Millay House. Just great work. So my brother David and I have been working on a new book, Paintings of Penobscot Bay, to be published later this year by Islandport Press. So I've been reading books about the Bay and came across a reference to Millay in Gorham Munson's 1959 book, Penobscot, Down East Paradise. Munson writes, Abby Houston Evans used to climb Maguntacook with a younger girl, Edna St. Vincent Millay, who wrote a youthful poem about a climb before dawn and the triumphant moment at the top. I'd like to read that youthful poem, which is untitled. Here it is. Sometimes, oh, often indeed, in the midst of ugly adversity, beautiful memories return. You awake and wonder, you awake at 4:30, wondering what wonder is in store. You reach for your clothes in the dark and pull them on. You have no time even to wash your face. You have to climb Maguntacook. You run through the sleeping town. You do not arouse even a dog. You are so young and so light on your feet. What a way to live. What a way. No breakfast, not even hungry. An apple, though. in the pocket, and the only people you meet are store windows. The path up the mountain is stony and in places steep, and here it is really dark. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. The smell of bark and rotten leaves and dew, and nobody awake in all the world but you, who lie on a high cliff until your elbows ache to see the sun come up over Penobscot Bay. And I have to say, I can't read that last line without humming part of the chorus from the Sheryl Crow song. All I want to do is have some fun till the sun comes up over Santa Monica Boulevard. And I apologize for that. I did, in looking at Millay's poetry, found what might be a companion poem to the one I just read. And it's very short. I was going to just throw this in, but it's sort of almost a little later. Maybe she's already been up there on the mountain for a while. It's called Afternoon on a Hill. I will be the gladdest thing under the sun. I will touch 100 flowers and not pick one. I will look at cliffs and clouds with quiet eyes, watch the wind bow down the grass and the grass rise. And when lights begin to show up from the town, I will mark which must be mine and then start down. And here's a poem of mine related to one of the islands in Penobscot Bay, Great Spruce Head. Like Kristen, I had an opportunity to spend a week out there a few years ago. I start the poem with an epigraph from a book that I read as a kid, Frank Edwards' Stranger Than Science, a collection of real life stories that appear to have stumped all reason. So this is called The Miracle, North Meadow, Great Spruce Head Island. And the epigraph from Edwards is it possible for a human being to literally walk off the earth in full view of witnesses? Reading how David Lang disappeared in front of his family in a field in Gallatin, Tennessee, on a sun-filled day in September 1880, I always pictured my father in the back meadow in Watermill, where he later planted Christmas trees, swallowed by the sandy Long Island soil he loved so much, and how we'd search and search without reward and grieve and wonder. Today, I'm imagining it's my turn, standing in an expanse of tall grass, hawkweed and buttercups, calling out to my children, waving once and poof, gone without a trace, perfect exit, no assisted living or bedside manner, no questions about comfort, no memory issues, except theirs of me, who went missing that day in an island meadow, a mystery that baffles science, a flawed discipline that can't begin to understand something as simple and ill-defined as a miracle. Thank you.
Next is Jefferson Navicky.
Kathleen, I think you skipped me.
Oh, I did. Next is Claire Millikin.
I mean, you can skip me. It's your
No,
show.
we're not skipping. Claire Millikin is the author of 7 books of poetry published by Two Leaf Press and by Unicorn Press, a co-editor of Enough, Poetry of Protest and Resistance. She is a 2021 recipient of the Maine Literary Award. She teaches art history and American studies at the University of Maine and at Bates College.
Hi. Yeah, so thank you, Kathleen, and thanks for unskipping me. Yeah, so I chose, well, it's always hard to choose a poem of Millay's, but I'm reading Bluebeard, which is a sonnet. This door you might not open, and you did. So enter now and see for what slight thing you are betrayed. Here is no treasure hid, no cauldron, no clear crystal mirroring the sought for truth. No heads of women slain for greed like yours, no writhings of distress, but only what you see look yet again, an empty room, cobwebbed and comfortless. Yet this alone out of my life I kept, unto myself, lest any know me quite. And you did so profane me when you crept unto the threshold of this room tonight, that I must never more behold your face. This now is yours. I seek another place. So it's a great poem because it, turns the table on the fairy tale of Bluebeard. And yeah. So for the poem of my own, there's really no thematic connection to Millay. I don't write many sonnets. And so I had to, kind of dig deep and find a sonnet, in honor of Millay, the great sonneteer. And this is called Penobscot. You do not await me in particular, but you do wait. Ratcheting ice floes shimmer rickety houses on your bank. You shift a broken ladder sky, ice haggard, reaching a near eternity. Of such desolate dusk pinks, I could settle a debt with my own itinerant steps. Come back. This river isn't time, but its ice catches pulse. Come back. Snow's thick sharpness tells me my child's nearly grown, and I must keep my own house for myself now. Beyond this road, a curve, rivers bend. Elegy is distance. My mother is leaving by preparing to leave. Each night she moves deeper toward that sleep. You await, river. For no one in particular, your pageant of arriving. I have long been a runner of distance. So yeah, that's me. Hope I didn't take too much time. You can move on to the next, and thanks for
Jefferson Navicky is next.
Hi, Kathleen.
Hi, there you are. Did I mispronounce your name?
No, that's perfect. Navicky.
Okay. You're the author of Antique Densities, Modern Parables, and Other Experiments in Short Prose, as well as the poetic novel, The Book of Transparencies, and the story collection, The Paper Coast. He's the archivist for the Maine Women Writers Collection, which houses a small but mighty Edna St. Vincent Millay collection. He lives in Freeport with his wife, his dog, his cats, and his chickens. Welcome.
Thank you, Kathleen. Thanks for the invitation. It's so much fun to hear this reading. It's one of my favorites. So every year I'd love to hear this Millay reading, and such a full picture of Millay. I really enjoy that. So I'm going to read a short excerpt from her 1940 poem, There Are No Islands Anymore. And I'm going to share my screen so you could see. There's we have at the Maine Women Writers Collection where I work, we have a few of this poem. This is a broadside. There's also a chapbook that we have, a beautiful letterpress chapbook. And I chose this poem for two reasons. One is it's for its islandness, and I really love today's all the stuff about Ragged Island today. I was really into, and even though it doesn't talk about Ragged Island particularly, I'm imagining, and I don't think it's too much of a stretch, that she is also imagining Ragged Island when she's talking about islands. And the second part of the choosing this particular poem is that subtitle, which is lines written in passion and in deep concern for England, France, and my own country. It's a poem that feels really pertinent to this moment, and it's about isolationism, and particularly in this moment, the allure of isolationism is so strong, and you don't have to look very far into the news and in different directions to see people kind of caring most about taking care of their own things and less about what happens to the greater good. And then the last thing I want to mention about this particular poem, down at the bottom, it's very small, you probably can't see it, but it says that the benefits of this broadside are donated to the British War Relief Society. And the other chapbook that we have in the Maine Women Writers collection has a statement from Millay saying that she donates all of her proceeds from this poem, and as does the publisher, Harper and Row. All proceeds are donated to an official war relief fund. And that just seemed really significant to me, that a poem or a poet as mighty as Millay would turn her skill and kind of her literary power towards such an overtly political topic, and that seemed really admirable to me. So it's the kind of poem you can jump around a little bit in, so I'm going to read an excerpt from it. So there are no islands anymore. Dear isolationist, you are so very, very insular. Surely you do not take offense. The words well used in such a sense. 'Tis you, not I, sir, who insist you are an isolationist. And oh, how sweet a thing to be safe on an island, not at sea. Though someone said some months ago, I heard him and he seemed to know, was it the German chancellor? There are no islands anymore. Dear islander, I envy you. I'm very fond of islands too. And few the pleasures I have known which equaled being left alone. Yet matters from without intrude at times upon my solitude. A forest fire, a dog run mad, a neighbor stripped of all he had by swindlers, or the shrieking plea for help of stabbed democracy. Startled, I rise, run from the room, join the brigade of spade and broom, help to surround the sickened beast. Hear the account of farmers fleeced by dapper men, condole and give something to help them hope and live. Or if democracy's at stake, give more than I can make, and notice with a rueful grin, what was without is now within. The tidal wave devours the shore, there are no islands anymore. This little life from here to there, who lives it safely anywhere? Not you, my insulated friend. What calm composure will defend your rock when tides you've never seen assault the sands of what has been? And from your island's tallest tree, you watch advance what is to be. The tidal wave devours the shore. There are no islands anymore. And then I wanted to pair it with a really short poem of mine, because when I think back about that poem, what I most admire of it is I think it is Millay's real sincere effort for a poem to change the world. And this is a poem about poems that make that kind of genuine effort to change the world and the power of encountering one at the right time. So it's called One Poem. Please note, poems will save the world. Not so much poetry with a capital P, but poems carried in pockets, posted to Facebook, read at rallies, stuck to refrigerators, read at retirement parties as gifts from the universe. The small, needful facts that sustain us at protests and on the radio while pulling into the grocery store after a long day of work. One poem at a time. One poem to be sipped like a cup of tea for our sitting together. One piece of cake after dinner, one glass of wine, even if it's 2 glasses of wine, because one poem stretches out into an evening of conversation beneath a string of lights in the backyard, friends and family at the picnic table, and children running through the dark, laughing, poems sparkling in their hands, a few moments of wondrous light. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I wonder if that longer poem that you read, or from the longer poem, was that part of when she was actually reading those over the air?
It may have been a poem that she read over the air. It seemed like it got around. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, she did that for a while, much to the distress of many of her poet friends. They thought she was ruining her reputation. Yeah. Okay, we have one more poet, Rachel Ouellette, who began writing poetry at a young age. she's still young. So at a younger age, years later, while in high school, she had the honor of seeing 3 of her poems published in Balancing Act 2, an anthology of poetry by Maine women. Now a student at the University of Maine, she is majoring in English and working on a creative honors thesis that involves writing poems with forms and constraints. Kathleen Ellis is her thesis advisor. Welcome, Rachel.
Well, first, thank you so much for inviting me to read. I will start by reading a sonnet by Edna St. Vincent Millay. Okay. I shall go back again to the bleak shore and build a little shanty on the sand in such a way that the extremest band of brittle seaweed will escape my door but by a yard or two, and never more shall I return to take you by the hand. I shall be gone to what I understand and happier than I ever was before. The love that stood a moment in your eyes, the words that lay a moment on your tongue, are one with all that in a moment dies, a little undersaid and oversung. But I shall find the sullen rocks and skies unchanged from what they were when I was young. And I love the sonnets of Millay, so I wrote a poem that was inspired by this sonnet, and it is called If at Last. My face reflected in the window pane, I'll trace the wrinkles on my faded cheek while wondering, those memories I seek, might they be trapped in rolling drops of rain, or are they flowing freely in my veins? My thoughts will shout, but I will never speak about the days that broke so dark, so bleak. I still remember how you said my name, that sunlight in the gloom, so long ago, so often crossing paths by happenstance. I still remember the way you said my name, and so I wish I had a second chance. But if at last we met again, I know that I'd walk by without an upward glance. Thank you.
Bravo. Bravo. I hope everyone realized that she had memorized her poem. So that brings us to a close. And I thank you all for coming. And we look forward again to next year for 131. And I hope you all had a good time. I'm looking for Jude to say thank you again.
Yes, I'm here. And thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Gwendolyn, for being my co-pilot. And thank you all the poets. I mean, your work is tremendous. It's so heartwarming and deeply felt and so moving. So I'm so honored to be able to share this platform and offer it to you. And yes, let's do it again. It was just beautiful.
We think, many among us think, that one day the Farnsworth Art Museum should publish a book of all these response poems, but also just Millay and a contemporary look at Millay maybe, and have contemporary poets alongside some of her poems. It'd be wonderful.
What a wonderful idea. Yeah, that sounds great. I will see if I can advance that. That's a really awesome idea.
And maybe with some of the photographs, I can't remember the name of the woman photographer.
Bernice Abbott.
Yeah. Did quite a few of hers. Yeah. Did quite a few of her. So thank you all.
Yes. Happy birthday, Vincent.
Yes, happy birthday. Birthday, Millay.
Thanks, Kathleen.
Put it all. Yep.
Thank you all.